We know that self-sabotage is really negative self-talk that prevents us from believing we can do things. Um, it can be conscious or unconscious, and it can keep us from setting, working towards, and reaching our goals. Self-sabotage can hold you back from doing what you want to do. What contributes to this kind of these kinds of behaviors and thoughts? Low self-esteem, beliefs perhaps about being deficient or not good enough, thinking you're incapable, you're maybe unintelligent. All of these things create a crucible of negativity. And that can hold us back. And these deep-seated limiting core beliefs can fuel fears about performance and foster general anxiety and social anxiety, as well as depression. They can also lead to procrastination. So let's see, a bunch of people are joining now. I want to say hello. Let's see. Carol says, wait to tackle tasks until I feel like it. So that's one of the ways that you get in your own, that's one of the methods you use to get in your own way. I'd love to hear from other people what self-sabotage means to you or how it shows up. Karen says, sometimes I don't have enough patience. Nuala says, it's been a long week. My son has ADHD and ASD. He's 16 and it's been bumpy. I always blame myself for not managing things better. Well, Nuala, I want to give you a big hug because you're probably doing the best you can in a really tough situation. And blaming yourself is not going to help you or your son. So just use this time here in our Facebook Live to exhale, give yourself a hug, and be in the community of people who really get it. Karen, anxiety is something that you use to self-sabotage. Hi, Susan. Alex, yep, all of the above. Jessica, I can get in my head too much and overthink at times, which can trigger anxiety, or the mom guilt can sabotage me. I hear that. Thank you, Annie. Max, I let myself go to self-soothe activities instead of facing what I need to do, including some addictive behaviors like video games. Well, that's very insightful. Teresa, bedtime gets messed up because of all of a sudden I have so many things to do. Yes, this will be available later, Samantha. Bailey, over time and talk myself out of it with lots of negative talk and my anxiety kicks in. So I think it's interesting that many people have mentioned anxiety. I want to talk about self-sabotage and shame and anxiety. So we know that a lot of people who have ADHD feel a sense of shame from early on that can make them doubt themselves now as adults or as children or teens, increase nervousness, and over time, heighten personal vigilance. And all of these things combined together will nurture anxiety. We have anxiety naturally, but it might intensify that anxiety, right? It'll turn the volume up on that anxiety because we can't get rid of anxiety. It's how we're wired. What we want to do is learn how we can control it instead of letting it control us. One of the things that happens for a lot of kids, young kids with ADHD and in teens, and then this continues through adulthood, is that you don't know when the next time is that you're going to mess up. In fact, you're not even aware that what you're doing is messing up until you get messages or, the teacher calls your name, tells you to sit down or pay attention or, keep your hands to yourself. All of these things that have to do with a certain level of impulsivity that is often beyond your control or emotional dysregulation. It's hard for children. And then those messages of how you're missing the mark continue into adulthood. This shame about ADHD or being different from your peers can lead to embarrassment and then the desire to avoid any kind of insecurity or pain. And sometimes the shame is obvious. Your daughter may actually, hide her test from you because she doesn't want you to see the grade. And sometimes it's more hidden. Your son, acts like he has lots of friends. He games with them, but in reality, he doesn't have anyone to sit with at the lunch table. So either way, shame about not being able to succeed at school or socially or manage life tasks early on, as well as other kids or your perception of how other kids do it, can continue into adulthood and then actually create this belief that no matter what I do, I'm not going to get it right. So then I'm not going to bother trying. So let's see what people are saying. Let's see. Um, not using the tools you have available. I sometimes forget letting perfect be the enemy of good enough. I think that's just so fantastic. I love that, Max. I'm sorry that there's some connectivity issues. There are a lot of storms right now in the Northeast in the United States. So there's nothing I can do. I'm plugged directly in to the internet. I'll just check my connection just to jiggle it a little bit and make sure, but yep, I'm in there. Okay, Jane says, my daughter is really clever, but she always dooms herself. She causes issues so she doesn't have to do things, even if it means she gets into trouble. She does have anxiety and social anxiety. She used to drink to forget. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. So sometimes we create distractions from our core issue, that whether I'm feeling insecure or I don't trust myself. So I'm going to talk about that in a minute. What are some signs of self-sabotage? Max says, getting caught up in what steps should be done first and not moving forward, even if it isn't the perfect way, making obstacles where there don't need to be any. I think that is absolutely part of perfectionism, and of course, self-sabotage is a form of perfectionism. Jane, she never thinks anything is wrong, even when I'm upset. She doesn't understand why I'm upset. I hear that. Nuala, I feel my anxiety is much more now that I'm 50, but it is hard to separate when the teen situation is exacerbated by his ADHD, ASD, which again, you have to manage um, with work and another sibling. Yeah, so there's a lot going on, it sounds like, Nuala, in your house, and it can be really difficult to manage your own anxiety in the midst of that kind of overwhelm. Max, it was. I tried rewinding 10 seconds, but give it the buffer, and it seems to have fixed. Oh, I'm glad. I used to struggle with an all or nothing mindset too, right? And that black and white thinking, that all and nothing mindset, is very common for people with ADHD, and I think that it actually can get you in trouble. It's part of that fixed mindset, because then you don't really feel like you can try or experiment because it's all or nothing. So what are some signs of self-sabotage? So one of the signs is avoidance, staying away from people or environments that cause discomfort, whether it's people or situations or tasks that make you uncomfortable, you're going to opt for something else. Fixed mindsets. This is believing that you can't change and your abilities will not improve. This is part of what you were saying, I think, before. Let's see, who was that? That was Jessica, yes. That you feel like it's an all or nothing mindset and that you can't change and your abilities are not going to improve. And that's that fixed mindset. Another sign of self-sabotage is exercising a lot of control over things that actually you don't have any control over. So you're attempting to control other people's behaviors or situations that provoke uncertainty and anxiety in an effort to make yourself feel calmer and safer. Perhaps you please others at your own expense, making choices to be accepted or liked by people by engaging in activities or saying things that you think people will find amusing. We see this a lot with kids, don't we? Or making choices. We see this with teens, maybe smoking marijuana or drinking alcohol or trying to be, the class clown, ways that people will accept them, even though they know in their heart of hearts that that isn't necessarily the right choice for them. So they're going against their own values and better judgments, and they may not share what those are, but at some level, of course, they know. Another sign of self-sabotage is engaging in self-harming or risky behaviors. These could be high adrenaline behaviors, like riding your bike with your hands off the handlebars. It could be, something that has to do with, skydiving, or maybe really fast skiing or skateboarding. It could also be self-harming behaviors. Those are risky behaviors. Self-harming behaviors could be something like substance abuse or gambling or sexual promiscuity or cutting or an eating disorder. So any of those things could be a sign of the way that you're hurting yourself. And those of course require, really mental health treatment. And then one of the last signs of self-sabotage to me is engaging in compare and despair, looking at what other people do and comparing yourself negatively to them. So you have your list up, you look over here on the right, and this person is making the most beautiful cupcakes and keeping their house clean, and it's COVID, and they're like managing homeschooling. And then you look over here on the left, and this person has a full-time job and somehow has kids who can play 3 sports and are succeeding at school, and you're comparing yourself to those people instead of actually looking at yourself. And that's really looking behind. Where have you come from? Where have you come from to get where you are? And where are you going? Where do you want to go towards? So I see a lot of comments. I'm going to dive in. So let's see. Used to be told that you won't do it, or if I say I'm going to do something, I get laughed at, and then I don't want to do it. Right. So when you receive negative feedback from other people, and we've talked about this when we've talked in the past about rejection sensitivity dysphoria. There's a fear of rejection or social anxiety. I'm going to be embarrassed or humiliated. Let's see. Thank you, Annie, for sharing that. Max, I'm trying to do things someone else's way instead of trusting my own knowledge or experience about what does or doesn't work for me and other people with ADHD. I think, Max, thank you so much for saying that, because I think a lot of people with ADHD lose faith in what makes sense to them over the period of time when you are in school and you're growing up, because you're told to do it in a neurotypical way. What is it like to be neurodivergent in a neurotypical world? Some of that experience is feeling like people just don't actually get who you are, and they make you conform to what makes sense to their brain instead of what makes sense to yours. Alex, well, it's so difficult to accomplish things. It usually takes all my energy, or it's not even worth it. Right. And in those cases, Alex, what we want to do is to break things down into smaller pieces so that you can do something, no matter how small, and feel like, okay, check. I'm making progress. Because what happens is when tasks feel like Mount Everest, you just won't do them at all. And then you're going to feel bad about yourself that you're not doing them. Nicole, that shame has haunted me forever. Only now at 42 am I getting to the roots of my thinking. ADHD issues caused shame, which made me anxious. Now that I realize that, I'm pulling back the layers. It's so freeing. Now I can help my kids and not feel that shame. Thank you so much, Nicole. I'm so glad that you're actually getting to the roots of your thinking and realizing that there's so much more to you than that negative self-talk. Nuala, I don't do this, but my son does. I'm struggling to get him to. Adapt or be brave. That's really nice. I like that. To adapt to what's going on, be brave, take a risk. This is hard for a lot of people with ADHD because you've been met in the past with so much negativity or teasing or perhaps even bullying. It's hard to do that. Joellen, okay, Joellen, there are some issues with connectivity today. There's a huge storm, an ice storm on the East Coast, so I don't know what's happening. I'm sorry about that. Alex, and when the avoidance is so obvious, it just makes life more embarrassing and discouraging. I don't know, whatever the answers can be, it can be difficult sometimes. Right, so you are avoiding something and other people see you avoiding, and then you feel embarrassed, so it just sort of doubles or triples the shame or the humiliation. Jessica, I used to try to fix people, be a people pleaser and codependent, which led to addiction. I overcame a lot of this, but it's still a work in progress. Thank you so much for saying that, Jessica. I really appreciate it. I think being able to own your challenges and actually where you've come from is so important. And codependency, when we try to please other people instead of pleasing ourselves, is such a toxic process. Thank you. Reckless behaviors, yes. Okay. Giving up can be easier. Sometimes it can be. Um, great. Thank you, Nuala. Okay, so we've now looked at some of the signs of self-sabotage. And there are different ways to really address your self-sabotage. And just like with treating social anxiety, dealing with self-sabotage is a combination of cognitive behavior therapy and mindful awareness. And it's similar to the treatment for social anxiety or for depression because the focus is on the core belief of deficiency. Was something that is wrong with you. I'm not this. Okay. So if I would wonder if you'd be willing to put in the chat, what are some of the things you say to yourselves that you think are self-sabotaging? Like, I'm not as smart as so-and-so, or I'm not as good a presenter as so-and-so, or I wish I was prettier. What are the things that you say to yourself that hold you back and from being who you want to be, from acting how you want to act? Please put these in the chat so I can talk about them with you and see if we can come up with some counter statements. So, of course, what we want to do is to establish healthier alternatives to these, self-sabotaging behaviors, these ways that we hurt ourselves, what we hold ourselves back, and perhaps even safety-seeking behaviors in terms of avoiding things that challenge us. So to be able to be present in a situation instead of, lost in our thoughts about how we're going to mess up or what we're doing wrong, or not even bother trying sometimes. So, some of the patterns might be, I'm nervous, because I'm nervous beforehand, I'm nervous during, afterwards I judge myself, and there's lots of recriminations, I feel embarrassed, I'm not even gonna bother. Instead, what we want is to identify the negative core beliefs that we tell ourselves before something or even during, that there's this voice in our head that is saying, nah, 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 and you're not going to be able to do this. That is the voice of you might call it anxiety. You might call it stinking thinking. For those of you who are fans of Ted Lasso, he mentioned in one episode, I think in the first season, stinking thinking. I grabbed onto it. I love this phrase. So what is your stinking thinking? Let's share it. Let's get some of these stinking thoughts out so then we can come up with creative and effective rebuttals. So let's see what we've got here. I feel so bad, Nuala, that I struggle with the things that make him uncomfortable. I don't really get the way he thinks. I love him. I wish it were easier for him. So what you are saying now, what he does, which means I feel bad and I'm worried what other people think. That's right. Dana, I'm 64 years old, welcome, and still struggle with this. Just this morning, I lamented to a friend about this. I need to go and watch the video shared by Attitude. I'm glad you're here, though, to talk about it now. Max, not bringing my best self and still expecting best results, forgetting or not prioritizing my own maintenance, like sleep, meds, food, and sunlight. That's right. And so when we don't actually take care of ourselves, it's much harder for us to bring our best self. So self-care is actually a really important antidote to self-sabotage, right? And I'm going to ask you, what do you do for self-care later on? Let's see. Alex says, This isn't working. And what are all these barriers and where do they come from? And how come others don't have these barriers? So I think the first thing that we want to do when we have that kind of thought, Alex, is to remember actually that we can't compare our insides to other people's outsides. You know, someone may look really calm and collected and cool and maybe even a little bit unreachable, and inside they may feel really shy and insecure, and they put that up so they because they're not comfortable actually sharing themselves. So it is important to really think about, you know, what we see isn't necessarily what's going on for people, and that can be really confusing, particularly because a lot of people with ADHD, let it hang out a little bit more than people who may not have it. I don't have enough energy is something you say to yourself. Thank you, Lane. I second guess everything. Thank you, Karen. Right. So that kind of self-doubting is really problematic, because you do something and then you go back and you think, well, should I do that? Is that too ADHD? Is it too impulsive? Is it a distracted? Is it an inappropriate thing to say? And then you're lost in your head and you're not in the present moment. And this is how self-sabotage can reflect parts of social anxiety, because in social anxiety, we're in our heads too. What we're in our heads is we're thinking about what other people may be thinking about us, even though we have no idea what that is. In self-sabotage, we're thinking about our own thinking again, but in also a more toxic way. Here, we're thinking about what we're doing, and then we're doubting ourselves, and then we're wondering if maybe other people might be thinking about us. So it's this really kind of vicious cycle of poisonous thinking. Max, I can't be good enough, and I may as well not try. Or alternately, I need to be good enough, and just make trying harder will make that happen. Well, that's interesting. I'm curious, Max, for you, when do those two things come up, and how do they work for you? Christina, normal people don't do this, I often say to myself. Well, I would like to say to you, Christina, how do you know? And what is normal anyway? I feel like the width of normal has grown. And I would like to say my personal belief is that just like there's gender diversity and racial diversity and religious diversity and economic diversity, there's also neurodiversity. We all have different types of brains. Only those of us who may be neurodivergent, or maybe anxious, or maybe depressed, or maybe schizophrenic, or anything, bipolar, anything that's not considered neurotypical, somehow we feel like we're less than. And that really isn't fair to us, because the umbrella of neurodiversity doesn't necessarily judge that this is better than that. It's the culture that does that. And that's the frustrating part. And it's the same with the culture around gender diversity or sexual diversity, what's prioritized and considered normal and what's considered abnormal. And these categories have been challenged over the last 20 years. And I think things are changing significantly, but it is an uphill battle. Other people do this fine, so I should be able to as well. That's an interesting thought. It's not necessarily a fact. They may look like they do it fine, but you don't know what's contributed or what the backstory is. And I think that's an important thing to think about when you're talking about your judgments about other people and compare and despair, is we never know what the backstory is for someone else. Jessica, self-doubt can easily sabotage me. Al says, stinking thinking, I'm not a good person. Because, and you enter the reason. So Al, I want to say to you that whatever you do has nothing to do with your goodness as a person. We all come into the world, we're as good people. I think that because you may act in a particular way doesn't mean you're not a good person. And perhaps the categories of good and bad are not really helpful. Maybe there are different categories. Are you a loving person? Are you a caring person? Are you a warm person? What is good anyway? I think good is and bad are very limiting categories. For me, I like to say, is this effective? Is this ineffective? Is this work? Does this not work? Am I being loving in my heart? Am I being judgmental and checked out? There are all kinds of different types of language to use instead of that. Noala, I feel I'm honest and just recognize that I am good at some things, but not so good at others, particularly how I sometimes react to him. And tonight I've got upset and stressed, and literally you can see it in my whole body and face. And now I feel exhausted as I believe my reactions have made him feel bad. And now I'm sitting here feeling sick and crap mothering and have physical anxiety. Okay, Noala, I really want you to do this. I want you to breathe in a really soothing color like a blue or an orange or a pretty yellow or a green, and breathe out some of that toxic stuff because you had an incident with your child. You're not a failure. You're not a bad mom. You reacted, and you can go back and be accountable to your son and say, you know what? I overreacted in this moment. I'm not proud of it. I can see how that hurt you, and I'm working on it. That's what you can do, and that models for him how to do that himself. Cassandra, I used to attach all of the negative effects of ADHD to my character. I've began separating myself from my brain, and now I attach things like paralysis, time blindness, and impulsivity to my brain only. So on the days when my brain is working against me, I am loving this, Cassandra. When the brain is working against me, hold on a second. I lost myself. I can say, I can't stand my brain today. It's really making things difficult. I call them bad brain days, and I tell myself that it isn't forever, and work to find ways to increase dopamine or just rest if that's what I really need, and eliminate the perceived judgment people have of me of lack of productivity. It eliminates the negative self-talk I've engaged in for so many years. So I just want to say to you, Cassandra, high five. This is a beautiful sharing, and I hope everyone can learn and listen with Cassandra, because she's separating herself, her core self, from her brain, from how her brain works. And so some days there are days where the brain just isn't online in the way that you would like, and some days it is. But whatever the day is, it doesn't affect your character analysis. We don't want to engage in character assassination because our brains are having a bad day. Max, even if I need this, someone else's needs are more important and I tend to ignore mine. Well, that's something that would be worth working on, because that is, that it puts you in a one-down position, and some people might see it as codependent. I've struggled with using drawers all my life. Whatever goes in a drawer seems to stop existing for me. It made me easier to forgive myself for that when I learned it is an ADHD thing. I had no idea that was related. I'm 55 years old and still learning about myself. Good for you. Isn't that fantastic? You're living and learning. High five. That's what it's all about, right? Max, I asked for a lot already, so I can't ask for what would help me here. Why not? There's no accountant in the sky that's basically saying, oh, hey, you know what? You've asked for 3 questions and your limit is 3 questions. Ask. If you want to, ask. If it will help you, ask. Why not? Eva, hypervigilance is by far my worst self-sabotage poison, ruining relationships. Can you say a little bit, Eva, about how hypervigilance works for you? Thank you for sharing. Susan, I don't know who I am supposed to be. ADHD, then what? Still don't fit in. See, these issues are just who I am anyway. Spiral of negative thinking. Right. So here, you have ADHD. I have a kid who basically said ADHD in my practice, who said ADHD was awesome, delightful, happy, and what was the other D? It was something like it was delightful and I don't know, something positive, like doing good things, something like that. So, I think we have to separate the processes in your brain and the behaviors you struggle with from your essence, from who you are in your heart. And I know this sounds super corny, but it's really important because we can't identify with our challenges because we're robbing ourselves of identifying with the parts of ourselves that make wonderful and unique and a gift to the universe. Mary, I struggle with not being good enough. I struggle to deal with the ADHD, depression, and not always loving myself. I always think everyone else's are good enough. Thank you, Mary, for saying that. I think a lot of people struggle with feeling not good enough, and a lot of people compare themselves to others and come up on the short end. Nuala, my constant thought is, how is he going to get through his life? This is negative thoughts, and I worry between educational trauma and personal trauma. I'm his mother. I sent him to school. I think, Nuala, if you can focus on the present, what's happening right now, and the next present, that would really be helpful for you because you don't know how things are going to be in a year or in 2 years. Right now is where you need to stay. Amanda, yes, Sharon, I'm so pleased you are saying this. We are different, not defiant. Should stop pathologizing it as neuronormative. I agree, Amanda. I am so really tired of that, of feeling like, you are like less than and in any way. Max, how do they work? They can sometimes be useful and realistic. It's when I give up too easily that the first is a problem. The second is a problem if I'm not stopping to consider whether trying harder is appropriate. Sometimes I need to try differently instead, or decide it isn't worth doing, or that I'd be better delegating or getting help. Okay. Thank you, Noala. I'm glad you're breathing. Max, I have this too. Knowing it's a part of ADD gives me permission to stop trying to make something work that just isn't going to work and frees me up to explore other options. Exactly. The definition of insanity is to continuing to do something that isn't working. I really believe do more of what works. If something is not working, that is a very clear message that it is time to zoom out, take some perspective, perhaps pivot, and try something else. And if you don't know what it is to try, ask someone who loves and supports you. Thank you, Lori, for saying that. Yes, it's an issue of brain chemistry and not a character failing. That is the most important thing here. This is nothing to do with character. It has to do with how your brain works. Anastasia, I'm tuning in late. I'll have to rewatch, but I struggle with the drawer issue. Great, thank you for sharing. And creating doom boxes. A lot of people create those. Once I learned why I do it, I added it to my schedule to go through a doom box once a week. Fabulous. I love that. So you put it in the box, and then once a week you go through it and you set a time for it, and you probably set a certain amount of time. And this way you don't have to feel bad about yourself for the rest of the week when you're putting things in your doom box. And do means don't touch, only move. But then you're going to get to it. It's so true. When my son smiles, it is everything is so rare. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Annabelle, I've recently realized my behavior is due to my ADHD, but when I try to explain that to the family, that's why I do things, they laugh at me or say that's not because of ADHD, which makes me feel worse. This, Annabelle, your statement is heartbreaking for me, and it also is infuriating. And you're not the first one to say this in our lives, and I'm sure you won't be the last. Many people do not understand what ADHD is and how it works and how much it affects how people live and think. And so what I want to say to you is that when people are laughing at you, that's a signal that they don't really get you. And maybe that would be to send them an article to read, have them come to a Facebook Live. Think about how you're explaining your behavior. Because if you're trying to justify why you do things because you have ADHD, people don't like excuses. Accountability is different. And maybe that's something that we can talk about sometime, because it's different to say, oh, yeah, well, I didn't do the laundry again because of my ADHD. Or it's another thing to say, I didn't get to the laundry today. I didn't prioritize it. I didn't set an alarm for myself, and therefore I forgot. I forgot it. I have set an alarm, and I will prioritize it for tomorrow. I'm sorry. Natasha, I had this in counseling recently. Your thoughts will always be there, but it helps to separate yourself from those thoughts by attaching them to separate characters on a bus. And you can say to yourself, oh, that's just so and so talking. That's not me. Um, or I'm not taking notice of them. I love that. That's really great. And you could also name those characters. You know, they could have theme songs or something really fun. I read an amazing book, Kristen says, Clutterbug or something like that, and it talks about different organizing styles on two spectrums. I realized that I need open and clear or color-coded organization, and stuff stays put and in my line of sight and thoughts. It helps a lot. Thank you for talking about that. Seems like a great book. And I do think we all have different organizing styles. That's great. I love that idea. Um, so thank you for sharing that. And Eva, you're saying hyperfocus, hypervigilance. I scan and analyze facial expressions, tone of voice, written words, etc., to secure I'm good enough. Basically, make sure I'm not being too much or too little. Okay, so Eva, there's a difference between looking for feedback information and over focusing on what you think people are thinking about so that you're not able to actually participate because you're scanning. I can't quite tell which is the issue for you. Okay, before we end, I want to get to some of the challenges, some of the solutions. Okay, so some of the solutions that we're talking about here are being able to turn your attention away from that internal negative noise and lowering the volume on them. Kind of like it becomes background noise, you know, when you're cleaning the kitchen instead of the thing you're sitting listening to. So how are we going to do this? So we're going to practice self-compassion and forgiveness, right? We're going to free yourself from seeing yourself as unworthy to accepting yourself as you are. We're going to learn to practice how to sort of laugh at some of our stumbles, laugh with ourselves and improve them rather than shame ourselves for the mistakes that we made. And we're going to invest in the power of yet. I may not be able to do this yet. I'm learning. I'm using a growth mindset. Okay? So this means that we're going to think about what are the phrases that you use for self-sabotage, which we talked about here, and what are the rebuttals you can create? Because as someone just said, you are not your thoughts. You're the sky, and your thoughts are clouds that kind of move through the sky. You're aware of them, you see them, they might rain on you, but you are the one who chooses to believe them, you know, or to listen to them. And it doesn't always feel like that. I know that when I'm distressed, particularly with those of us who struggle with emotional dysregulation, and I'm raising my hand, as you know, anxiety is one of my best friends. And when I'm anxious, I can get very agitated or I can get worked up about something. I have big feelings. And in those times, it is very, very difficult for me to see my thoughts as clouds in the sky. Because as far as I can tell, the whole sky is clouded. There's not one little inch of anything blue. And I'm stuck. And so that's why it's important in those moments to have some of these rebuttals, you know, on a Post-it, on your phone, or some songs. Like I've made myself a Happy Tunes playlist. And so when I'm feeling like I can't see any blue sky, I put that playlist on and I just sit in my lack of blue sky for a few minutes until it passes. One of the things that we do when we don't feel good about ourselves is we try to shove it down. We push it down because we want it to go away. And that pushing it down takes up a lot of mental energy. And it's fatiguing. And so what we want to do instead, because it's exhausting to push that away all the time, is to actually be where we are and to acknowledge it. I'm feeling crappy about myself today in this moment. I'm not happy that I said this, or I don't like that I said that. I wish it were different. I'm not a bad person. I just made a mistake. People make mistakes. It's what makes us human. So we have to have some phrases that we say to ourselves, okay? And perfectionism in particular is one way that adults with ADHD try to control outcomes and engage in self-sabotage because it's a fundamental tool for managing anxiety. So you're experiencing moments where you're aware that you're struggling or you've messed up, but you don't know necessarily why or how to fix it. And so then this develops into that persistent worry I spoke about earlier. When is the next time I'm going to receive negative feedback when I wasn't expecting it? And then you go into blaming and shaming yourselves. There's a lot of shoulds that go on with self-sabotage, or you depend on others for validation and approval. So what we want to do is to turn that around by normalizing and validating our very human experience, okay? We are supposed to make mistakes. It's how we learn. It's the meaning we attach to those mistakes and the cruel way we speak to ourselves because we made those mistakes that that sort of ends up with this kind of self-sabotage, negative fixed mindset. So I'd like to do something before I go back to the questions to close our meditation. I'd like to do a closing meditation. So I'm just looking at the time. I think I'm going to answer a few questions for 5 minutes and then we'll do the closing healing because I think it is important to have a tool. So let's see, Christina says, if I get stuck, sometimes I do better if I can commit to working on a task for 15 minutes. It's good to negotiate with yourself, build rewards, and build rewards for following through. I completely agree. That sounds like a great plan. Let's see. Christina, alarms. Oh, I set alarms for everything. That helps me a great deal. Thumbs up. Cassandra, my own mother who took me to be diagnosed with ADHD. But you look like you can do these things. I'm really tired of having to be the square in the peg hole that is forced into the round hole of the neurotypical world. It is so frustrating. I couldn't agree more, Cassandra. It is so frustrating. Let's see. Something happened on my screen. It is so frustrating to have to explain myself, to only be met with, that can't really be the case. I just ignore it now. I know what my struggles are and why I struggle. I don't need other people to validate my struggles or the reason for them. It's taken me 40 years to get to this place. I hope other people can get there sooner so you can begin living your authentic life. Beautiful. I think this is also very true, Cassandra, and I don't know your situation, but for people who are considered twice exceptional or gifted, who also have ADHD, there's this internal disconnect between their ability to understand, grasp, or perform in certain areas and their struggle in other areas. So thank you for saying that. Oh, we have so many comments. Okay. Let's see. Realize it as monkey chatter. Ooh, I like that phrase, monkey chatter. Okay, I'm going to put that down. We're going to come back to that. Personally, I try not to vilify my brain or separate it from the rest of me. ADD doesn't make me much less of a person or less valid. It makes me a different person who is still valid and valuable. I think that's so important, Max, and I'm really glad you shared that because I don't think ADHD needs to be about your character or who you are, John. Thank you for sharing that, John. Okay, Lori, would you be possible? Okay, someone's asking you to cut and paste Cassandra's comment. How do other people manage to follow the chat and the speaker? It's a challenge, I'm sure. Okay, so what I would like to do, Nuala, is thanking you, Cassandra, for your helpful comments. I'm thanking you too, Cassandra. It's really a gift to have you here today. It's a gift to have all of you, and I appreciate your honesty and your openness Dana says, I struggle too, and I go back and read the majority of the comments later so I can pay attention to the video. Thank you. So I'd like to close today with a healing meditation, just a little visualization that you can use whenever you want. So what I'd like you to do is to close your eyes. I'm not going to close my eyes because that'll be a little weird, but I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to take in a big breath and exhale. And breathe in this time a beautiful color, and exhale and breathe in again and exhale. Okay. And I want you to imagine yourself at a beautiful spot in nature, a place perhaps where you've been, a place that just popped in your mind the minute I said imagine yourself somewhere. See yourself in this beautiful place. What colors do you see? What's the temperature? Is it light? Is it dark? Is there water? Are there mountains? Grass? Are you in a beautiful room? Now, while you're in this beautiful place, I want you to imagine the face of someone who really loved you and you loved as well. Maybe this was a grandparent, a special teacher, a parent, a sibling, a partner, someone you love or loved. I want you to think about what encouraging words would this person say to you if they knew you were saying those self-sabotaging things to yourself. What kinds of caring, healing, loving statements would they say to you? Anything that comes in your mind is the right answer. It might be, I love you. It might be, it's okay. It might be, I don't understand and I love you. It might be, we can do this together. You're smart, you're capable, you're curious. Whatever it is, I'd like you to open your eyes and write down what that person said to you right now, whatever that phrase was. Okay, I want you to put this someplace that you can go back to it, because this is the beginning of how you transform self-sabotage into self-love. We think about what someone who loved us very much would say, because we have to remember ourselves in their love. And we want to remember what it feels like to feel good, okay? Because that goodness is in you. So Jessica said, you are beautiful inside and out. Oh, I love that. If anyone else would like to share what their special person said, I would love to see what that is. Does anyone else want to share? Okay, does anyone want to share any of the any sort of encouraging words that their special person said to them? You don't have to, but if you want to, I graciously, I think other people might be touched by them. I was thinking about my grandmother, and she said, "You got this, kiddo," and I do think about that. Lori, thank you, doctor, for your positive support and providing a clarifying and perspective regarding our hurtful and defeating misperceptions about ourselves. As adult ADDers who've spent decades undiagnosed, untreated, and were taught to self-sabotage by those who held us. Excuse me, something happened here. No. Okay, by those who held us in esteem and love that we modeled. This is so helpful in understanding the purpose and way to CBT. I'm so very glad. Jessica, you are so creative. I see you struggling, but I also see your progress. Beautiful. I love you, Mom. You have a lot of love to give before he soon thereafter passed away 8 years ago, my loving husband. Thank you, Paula. I can't remember, but I know they always believe in me. That's great. I always believe in you. Um, let's see what else. There's another comment. I'm trying to get this goofy thing to cooperate here. Come on, goofy thing. Cassandra, my children all have ADHD that manifests in different ways. Having ADD makes it easier for me to understand them, but I'm often guilty of expecting them to do things I want or need them to do, and have to remember they struggle just like me. Give yourself grace. You are doing, that's fabulous, Cassandra, what you're sharing. Um, give yourself grace. Uh, you're doing the best you can, and that is all you can do. You love your son. It's different when you're the parent. You have to shed those perceptions and focus on helping your son. Lane, I believe in you. You got this. If you wouldn't say it out loud to another person, um, why would you say it to yourself? Okay, wonderful. These are some very heartfelt and beautiful comments, and I think it's so important that we share this with each other, that there's a place